So what I want to share with you is a little bit of the background, the kind of the big picture of why is it that we are taking the time of introducing M in the curriculum here at SUNY. So it's just not an entertainment action. There is a big economical issues at the scale of the country that lead to motivation for introducing this topic into the curriculum. So as we teach the open source class at RTI, one of the topics that helps people understand open source is the nature of the scale. Open source is very counterintuitive when you think of the small scale. When you think about the individual action of somebody that does something and give it away for free without compensation, it's a little bit absurd in our current society. But when you look at the larger picture, things start making more sense. In a recent interview with Clinton, one explaining that there is no difference between being selfish or selfless if you understand how the world works. So when you understand that everything is connected, being selfless towards others is actually being selfish in the long term. Because when you are helping others, sooner or later that will go back to you and you will be better off as well. So something that happens in open source is that every time that you see some counterintuitive behaviors in the open source space, why some companies buying, putting $400 million into a technology to give it away, well, it turns out that on the other hand, they are receiving $4 billion in selling hardware. So there is some logic at the larger scale that when you step back and look at the larger picture, then it makes sense. It goes back to when Don was mentioning the example of the razors and blades. Well, they were not just being nice to people with those razors. There was ultimate motive, and it does have to be good for everybody. So the same happened with the printers. You know how ink is the most expensive liquid on earth, and that's why you can buy a printer by $50. That is well below the actual price of the technology. So let's look back at that bigger scale. So this is the US. The US has 315 million people. So at this scale, things look different. When we think about, I write software in my basement, that's one thing. When you look at the scale of the country and think that this is, we are going to talk about software that is going to benefit 350 million people, there's a different color to it. Now, this country generates $15 trillion in economic activity. That's a lot of money. This is about 30% of the planetary global, the GDP of the planet. That's about the scale of the economy of the United States. Of that, we spend 18% on healthcare. So that's a lot of money from one of the largest economy on the planet. And that comes out to $2.8 trillion. It takes a little bit of time to sense how big $1 trillion is. So you have to remember this is 1,000 billion, that is $1,000 million. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of pizza. and if you divide it into the population, this is about $8,000 per person. So each one of us is spending about $8,000 on healthcare. Some spend more and some spend less, but when we distribute it across the country, this is what we are spending. And in the country, we have about 5,700 hospitals. So again, this is where the economic logic of open source start making more and more sense. If you think, for example, about software that could be used in hospitals, well, the more hospitals use the same software, software can be copied for free, so the more you copy, the better off you are. If somebody develops software for a hospital and uses it only in one hospital, it's actually a waste of the effort, because you could just as well have copied that 10 times, 100 times, 5,000 times, and by the same investment of effort in creating those goods, you could have used it many times. The old mentality, so the business models of the Industrial Revolution, those business models that are very associated with patents and ownership and control, have a hard time understanding the logic of the binary world, the digital economy. They resist this digital economy. They think that it is something wrong with you being able to copy something for free. And therefore, they try to make it scarce again. They impose licensing, they impose intellectual rights on it, to try to make it back to what they are familiar with, making little boxes of chocolate that they can sell for $1. They are comfortable with that quantum of an object. And they are not very familiar with how to deal with a chocolate that you can copy for free. And how do you make money out of it? So by looking at the scale, then things start making sense. If you look at the economy of the country and making an investment in developing software that you're going to use in a hospital, if you write it once, you may as well copy it 10 times. And then the investment that you make in that software pays 5,000 times. So that would be the ideal situation. Now, of those 5,700 hospitals, 200 are hospitals managed by the federal government. 160 of those are in the Department of Veteran Affairs, and the remainder is in the Department of Defense. Coming back to the fact that we are in New York State, so about 1,000 hospitals from these 5,000 are managed by the states. So when we're looking at the deployment of Vista in New York State, it's a very interesting development because we know that Vista is used in most of the federal hospitals, the hospitals managed by the federal government. But there are a lot more of them at the state level. And the states, as you know, are not particularly floating in money. So if they can save resources by still having high quality software that they can install in their hospitals, it's good for everybody. There are about 3,000 non-for-profit hospitals. The large majority of hospitals are not really business dedicated to make profits. Most of them survive the way universities survive by having a foundation that will collect and raise funds, either by donations or by actual selling cakes, essentially, and bringing the money to make the difference for what they are actually doing. So most universities do not give money. Most hospitals, by the same token, are always in the red, and they need giving up. Even if you're a hospital in Beverly Hills, you are needing to have about $40 million to supplement the losses that you're having normally in operations. And there is about 1,000 for-profit hospitals. But by the same token, they are not particularly profitable businesses. So their margins are in the single digits of percentage in the revenues. And so it's a very fragile space to be where you can easily go up or beyond. So when we look back at that number, we look back at that $2.8 trillion that we spend every year on healthcare. 700 billion go to hospitals. It goes to the money was spent in the hospital itself. And this goes back to kind of the bad habits that Americans have developed about healthcare. And it's the fact that we don't take much care on prevention, we don't take much care about diet and exercise. We wait until everything is breaking down, and we have to be carried to the emergency room, and it's really, really expensive. And I also have an attachment to trying not to die, even when sometimes it may be a graceful way to just accept that it doesn't make sense to prolong your life for 2 weeks more under artificial means that are really, really expensive. Now, those are hard topics because nobody wants to say that, well, we have to let you go because we don't want to spend more money. But at the same time, it's a social decision, the fact that, well, those same resources could be invested in child care and other things. So it's a matter of social, how do you manage the well-being of the entire society. All right, so when we look at the number, it turns out that 25% of the money that we invest in healthcare, of those $2.8 trillion, 25% go to these hospitals. That's about 5% of GDP. 5% of the entire production of the country goes and is spent in hospitals. If you compare how much money we put in the Department of Defense, buying all these nice aircraft and aircraft carriers and everything that we spend in the Department of Defense, is less than that, $500 billion. A little bit less after the sequester, but anyways. And you look at the technology. So here are the airlines. They have computers in 1946. Just after the end of the World War II, they were deploying computers so you could book your flights using whatever the computer of the time was. That means this is a supercomputer for whatever they had at the time. So you could book automatic flights in 1946. In 2009, only 12% of hospitals in the United States have a computerized system. And so you have to wonder, why is it that you can book a flight 60, 70 years ago in computers, and you have to wait until 2009, and only in 1 in 10 hospitals will store your information in a computer. They will prefer to do it in paper, put it in a folder, put it in a cabinet, somewhere in a basement. Now, there is some benefit to paper. There are some good reasons why paper is used in hospitals. But at the same time, we have to wonder, why is it that you get better information processing for changing the oil of your car than for changing your legal point? That's an interesting question. So the federal government recognized that, well, maybe it's a good idea to use computers to manage information. So maybe if we give money to hospitals, they will adopt electronic health record systems. And they provided 22 billion to that's the meaningful use funding that was mentioned a little bit before. So it's a stimulus for the hospitals saying, well, if you adopt an electronic health record system, we'll give you essentially $100,000 per doctor per year. That's the exchange. Healthcare is the only industry for which the government has to stimulate them to use computers. Everybody else, in their normal minds, will just adopt computers out of the logic that it's more efficient to manage information that way. The airlines did it in 1946. So the effects is working, or it seems to be working very well. So in 2009, we only have 12% of hospitals, after spending $7 billion or investing $7 billion, so have 1/3 actually of what is supposed to come into the stimulus for adopting EHRs. We are about to 60% of adoption for 2015. Now, how effective this adoption is there are diverse opinions on it. And how much those hospitals who have invested about $100 million apiece per hospital, that's kind of the average of how much it would cost you to deploy an EHR in a hospital. How many of those will be able to survive through the loans that they have to acquire in order to pay for the system is another question. Because remember, those are not very profitable businesses. They are actually just in the borderline, and suddenly you have to get this loan for $100 million to pay for putting computers in your same place. So whether you survive and be able to pay it is an open question. Now, if you look at the electronic health record system market, again, this is going back to scale. You want to look at the scale of the country for these things to make sense. The largest company in this space is called Epic. This is the number of deployments that they have made. And those are attestations of deployments that are certified for meaningful use. So essentially, accepted deployments of EHRs. The second company is called Allscripts, so these are kind of who is who in the EHR space. And we look at that, so they are essentially competitors, but they are trying to modernize the management of healthcare in the entire country and overseas as well. And this is what they have in common. And this is a very curious paradox of technology and economics and business, is that we have an entire sector of the economy, 20% of the sector of the economy, so healthcare, that is 20% of our GDP. The computerized systems in this space are using the same technology, and it's a very, very known technology. It's completely ignored by academia. It's very known in the, even people who are normally working in computers in the informatics space do not know about it. Why is that? Excuse me. It seems that over time, something that used to be popular, people were hoping or expecting that it was going to go away. It turns out that it's a technology that is so essential and so effective that it's just not going away. And what is happening on the other hand is that the developers who have expertise on this technology are getting older, retiring, and in some cases dying. So all that knowledge that they have accumulated over decades is starting to get lost, and it's not being transmitted to another generation. If you are familiar with how we educate, how we learn about programming, there are certain things that we can learn from books, from tutorials. There are other things that you can only learn by working with somebody else who knows about that system. Those little tricks, those little shortcuts, the history of the system, why is that the variable was changed in 1952? Well, only one guy may know that. And you want to be able to have some overlap between the people who was there and know what the bodies are buried, and the next guy who's going to maintain the system next time. So that is the background of why is it that we are looking back at this technology, and even though some people think that it's obsolete, the reality is that most hospitals in the United States, the ones that are lucky enough to use computers to manage information, are using that technology. That's the reality. So what we have been looking at is the notion that this technology is essential for them, but it's not the only thing. So they are also using other types of databases, things like MongoDB or Oracle, More recent things like RDF and semantic data that are very promising in the space of healthcare. So this is not a matter of everything has to be in M. It's not a matter of you have to forget about everything else. It's a matter of, well, it turns out that we have this nuclear reactor in the basement, and the guy who knew how to manage the nuclear reactor is about to die, and nobody learned how to manage a nuclear reactor. Maybe we should put somebody young quickly around there to figure out what the buttons do before it's too late. So in the same way that it applies to the databases, it applies to the language. So M has this particularity of being both a database and a language. And that's part of what is very nice about it, is that you're writing code, and by just adding one character, something that you put in a local variable can now be stored in a database, in a permanent storage, without too much of breaking the logic of the code. That is very different than what you do with any other language. If you're using Java or Node.js or Python or C++, to talk to a database, you have your standard C language or Java code, and then you have the calls to the database that are kind of constructing the logic and the style of the project. In M is very integrated. So you have the notion of trees, and some of those trees can be stored in permanent storage. Some others are local requirements. So we look out, and again, this is thinking matter of scale. What is it that IBM put $400 million in Linux and give it away? That doesn't make sense. That is socialism, or is charity, is a donation. Well, no, it turns out that IBM is just as smart. They understand that the world is spheric, and the money that goes this way comes the other way. And they invested $400 million in Linux because they were selling $4 million in mainframes by putting Linux into it. Right? So is that when you look at the planetary scale and the entire system, it starts making sense. So the Linux kernel have benefit from the full adoption, not only from the technology sector, but also many businesses. Today, the large majority of contributions in Linux are coming from corporations. It is not really teenagers programming in the basements. This is engineers, well-paid engineers on their day jobs, making contributions to the kernel. That's 80% of the patches that are coming to the Linux kernel are coming from corporations today. Microsoft is the 20th largest contributor to the Linux kernel, and their contributions are larger than the sum of contributions coming from academic institutions. So it's not that some crazy people in the university sending code to the Linux kernel and keeping it alive. It's really that the business adoption of the system have recognized that it's essential technology. So it's a big system. They have 15 million lines of code. And if you look at the entire history of the project for about 20 years, they have benefit from contributions from 10,000 developers. That is a lot of people. It's a lot of code. But to give you an idea, Windows is about 40 million lines of code. The F-35 fighter have about 60 million lines of code. They spend more money in the software of the airplane than in the hardware of the airplane. And maybe that's one of the reasons why it doesn't work. All right, now, this is not people who just write the code and then the web went away. The perception that you can finish a software project is an illusion. You will never finish a software project. A software project is a living organism. When it's finished, it's dead. You don't want it to be finished because a software system is supporting an organization and it's supposed to be aligned with the organization. If the organization is alive, the software should be alive, tracking the changes in the organization. So if you start writing software today, you will be writing a software 20 years from now. It's not a manufacturing industry, it's a service industry. And this is very well represented in the Linux kernel. It has been around for 20 years. They make patches every 80 days. Every 2 months, 3 months, they make a new release. One release has about 10,000 patches. It's a lot of activity. And those 10,000 patches are contributed by about 1,200 developers. It's a lot of people, a lot of patches, a lot of activity, and it's very continuous. And they are doing this the open source way by understanding that it's in their benefit for everybody to have that Linux kernel that is very, very solid. Here is the magic proportion. This level of activity in the Linux kernel essentially indicates that you need one developer for every 1,500 lines of code in your system. If you want to keep it alive and healthy, you need a lot of people going around making sure that everything is working. And if you don't have enough people, then things start breaking up. Right? So if think about this building and you don't have enough people to maintain the building and change the light bulbs and paint the walls. Sooner or later, there is a broken door, then there is the broken window, and things are falling apart. And the same happening in software. If you don't have enough people to maintain it, then things start breaking apart. And suddenly nobody remembers where this cable was connected. And one day somebody will try to remove it and something bad will happen. So in terms of open source economics, we have to change our mindset. The traditional economics is an economics of scarcity. We think about, I have only this amount of resources and only this budget and only this time and how I manage to do everything, so I have to have contracts to make sure that this guy actually shows up for work and so on. That's the old mindset of the traditional economy of manufacturing. The open source economy is the other way. It's an economy of abundance. You start with the assumption that you have enough resources. And the question is how you organize those resources. So you need a guy who knows about nuclear physics, is Russian, and he's a national champion in swimming. It's a very hard person to hire. But if you have a population of 1,000 people, you have a population of 10 million, you will find one of those. So whenever you need one expert, somebody with a very specific set of qualities, if you have a large enough population, you will find it. That's the logic of the Wikipedia. So the Wikipedia has the purpose of being able to write one page on every topic. It's very hard to do if you only get the people in this room. But when you say, we are going to crowdsource that to the entire planet, well, you always will find somebody who's expert in any topic that you pick. Somebody out there is some guy who actually cares about the baguette and how it mixes with Trump. And that person will be perfectly qualified to write a specific page. So the economics of abundance are based on assuming and understanding that there is enough people, there are no resources, and you just need to organize them and make sure that they work together to fight. That's the difficult part. Now you can apply that back to the EHR program. So you think back, you have the country, you're spending 80% of your money that you don't have, because you're actually borrowing most of that, to fill up for the 30% of deficit in the budget. And a lot of that money goes back to hospitals, and a lot of that goes back to things like redundant treatment, missed results, misdiagnosis, loss of information. Not all the problems of healthcare will be solved when we have electronic record systems, but some problems will. And the interesting aspect of it is that we are spending so much in healthcare that if you just manage to save 1.1% of what we spend in healthcare, you have a lot of money to take care of the investment that is required to computerize the entire industry. So the way the situation is right now in healthcare is the increase of expenditures in 6 months in healthcare, because it's so large for the country, is larger than the entire revenue of the full software for sale industry in the United States. So about $200 billion, that was the increase on expenditures in a 6 month period in healthcare. That's how bad the situation is. And that's also a typical representation of the economics of open source. A lot of the money saving, or the money flow in open source, comes from saving money that is being wasted in inefficiency somewhere else. And the problem with wasting or saving from waste is that those savings usually don't make it back into your account. Right? So if you have a house and you have bad insulation, and you're heating your house continuously and paying for the heating, and because you have a window that is leaking that heat, the day that you fix that window, usually you don't put that money back into your accounting and say, now I'm getting all this money back. And most institutions do not do that practice, and therefore they have a challenging time understanding why is it that you want to invest in fixing that window. Now, if you look back at the larger scale, look at how much you're investing in heating the house for a year or 10 years, then by looking at the larger picture, it makes more sense to invest whatever, $5,000, $10,000 in fixing your windows, because that's going to fix or improve your savings in the larger term for something that you're expecting. So, it's something that was mentioned in the panel, is the notion that we need to have a new generation of managers and economists and lawyers who understand that different way of thinking. The fact that it's not always, I sell you this for $10, you give me $10, I give you this. That's a very narrow aspect of economic exchange. Sometimes you have to look at this larger space of how goods and services are organized at the scale of the country. So it's not only the Veteran Affairs or the Department of Veteran Affairs who have an EHR, the Department of Defense is also has had an EHR for a long time. Theirs have some challenges. While the VA managed to recover the data of a patient in 7 seconds, the Department of Defense takes 3 minutes. 3 minutes may not sound like a much, but Tara probably will tell you that you don't want to wait 3 minutes for the data of a patient to come up in the screen, when you probably have only 5 minutes to talk to a patient, or maybe 10. All right, so now let's look at, so VISTA is the EHR of the Department of Veteran Affairs, and it's a system that has 2.5 million lines of code. So it looks smaller than the Linux kernel, but it turns out that M is a very compact language. And when you look at one line of code in M, you're actually looking at the equivalent of a full function in C. So, you could make the point that there's a proportion of maybe 1 to 10 lines of code. So one line of M could be equivalent to 10 lines of C, or maybe 20, but there is some proportion there. So something like this that is actually equivalent to probably something like 25 million lines of code. But even if you don't go that far, and you supply the same density of programmers that you have in the Linux space. But remember, these are not people donating their time. These are engineers that have jobs, pay mortgages, send their kids to college. This is normal working Americans somewhere. But because they have a common goal, they put resources into a common resource. So if you look back at getting that same level of density and capability of development and put it into Vista, you will need about 1,600 developers. So it sounds like a lot of people, but it's not that many people. Especially again, if you look back at the scale of the country. You're sharing the code across everybody. Then you could go back to, let me clarify something before, sorry. When we say 1,600 developers, those are not full-time developers. Those are developers that have this long-tail type of work distribution, where 20% of the people do 80% of the work, and the large majority of the people from time to time do something. That long tail is usually dedicated to quality control. Those are the people who are going to say, oh, that window is broken, or there might be a bug here. They may not fix the bug, but the fact that they report it is valuable and has an economic contribution to the system. A lot of the quality of open source projects, or well-managed open source projects, come from that long tail. Because then your expert developers can focus on the kernel issues of the system. And if there is a word that is misspelled somewhere in the menu, that will be taken care of by somebody in the long tail. And because you have the economics of abundance, if you have 10,000 developers, you can be sure that if there is a misspelled word, somebody today, in the next hour, will have time to fix it. That's the notion of the economics. There is no need to set up a project, a budget, a project manager, set up a meeting. You know that somebody out of those 8,000 will fix it. All right, so we have this density of lines of code. We talk about that. So we are actually looking for about 16,000 developers in Vista. Again, not full-time developers. 80% of them will probably do part-time. Maybe some of them will do only one thing, only once. But you need them. And so it looks like a lot of people, but when you look back at how many hospitals we have, so we have 5,000 hospitals, and you're looking for 16,000 people, you only need 3 people from every hospital. And suddenly it sounds easy. A hospital is a rather complex organization, and if you just need 3 developers there, and again, those are not 3 full-time developers. One of them may be working half-time, and the 2 others may do one thing every month. And if you have that population working together at the scale of the country, then you can maintain the system. And then the economics do make sense. Who is going to pay for all of them? Each hospital pays for each one of those guys. The same way that in the Linux kernel, there is not a Linux corporation paying for the entire work. IBM put their engineers, Red Hat put their engineers, Microsoft put their engineers, and all of them put the benefits of the code back into the common pool. Something that is interesting about these contributors is that they are not really geeks like us. They are actually doctors and nurses and pharmacists who, because they need to use the system, become interested in the software. The history of this says that actually these people wrote the system. And this is part of the reason why it's so good, is because the people who wrote it really understood how medicine worked, how they understood what they needed. They didn't have to have meetings and PowerPoints. They didn't have to write a 6,000 pages requirement document that was passed to engineers. They knew how to do their business in healthcare. And they wrote code, maybe not the best code in the world from the software point of view, but the best code in the world from the point of view of managing the information of healthcare. So it really does what you need to do. So a lot of these people, these 3 people that we are asking to find in a hospital, could be one of these people, and maybe one developer from time to time. So why do we care about bringing that back into SUNY? So we have been inserting the modules on M in the database class that we have been teaching with Alex and Dima for 2 semesters now. And we have also been talking about it in the web development class. Because one of the challenges of M is really a database language. You're not going to use M to write a GUI. It's not Docker. So you want to couple that kind of the back-end database with things like modern web technology. So you can have menus in JavaScript, or maybe you use cell phone, you tablet, that talk to a back-end database. So things that we have done here, we have essentially this semester covered, this and the last semester, about 100 students. Now they are not expert M developers, but these are students that have heard about M. That is not a totally unknown mystery. They have some notion of what it is, and the next time that they are curious about it, they know that it's a hierarchical database, that it's a non-SQL database, and that they could learn more in some particular places. We have created teaching materials because that's one of the challenges of the language, is that there are only 3 books that you can find on most in Amazon. And there is only 1 tutorial that's actually a reference manual. So working here, I mean, with our course at RTI, we have created online materials that are reusable. So we have created materials for M as a database, M as a language. And what we're looking now, and I'm really excited and interested about, is, again, looking at that scale. It's very hard to educate 16,000 developers if we only can do 25 students per semester. So we'll be here for a long time. But it turns out that if you use online technology, like the massive online open courses, but suddenly we could take many of the modules that have been prepared already on training on M exercises for programming and for using it as a database. And we can put them online in a place where we know that some courses can get up to 160,000 students in a single chunk. Now, it's true that many of those students don't finish that course. That's fine. It's again the long tail economics. So when we go back online and open source, we have to get into that space of not everybody who enters will exit at the other end. But we have so many that it doesn't matter. So once you have 160,000, if you only graduate 1,000, those are still 1,000 that we didn't have before. So that's kind of what I'm excited to see for the summer and maybe the fall, is to move some of the modules that we already have prepared for the classes and put them online in such a way that they can be reused. We think that we have found some of the magic recipe of how difficult an exercise should be, how long it should be, how much it should cover, to make it easy for somebody to give it a try, spend half an hour on it. We have a better idea than 6 months before, let's put it that way. And so the key aspect of it is that once you put it online, we can go and do something else. We don't have to keep doing this all the time. You have to be visible a little bit from time to time, but it's a machine that keeps disseminating the technology. At some point, the network effects will take care of the rest. So once you have 1,000 developers out there that learn the system again and have online tools and forums and daily lists, they will take care of themselves. So it's really a matter of reaching that critical mass where you will have maybe 10 or 20 developers that are in their 20s and excited about the technology to keep it running. This is a very nice quote from Peter Block. Peter Block is a guru on community management. And he has this book called The Answer to How is Yes. And his point is that every time that we ask how, what we are really saying is, I don't really want to do it. So when you say, how long is going to take? How much is going to cost? You're saying something, but what you're really thinking is, can you please give me a reason for not doing it? And he pointed out that when you really are aware that something has to be done, you just do it. You don't ask how much it's going to cost. So when your house is in fire, you don't start asking how long it will take me to go for the water. You just do it. And that's the situation that we have today in healthcare. So we are spending 20% of the entire economy on it, and it's just increasing, and it's not maintainable. You cannot keep asking, how do we do it? When some of the things that can be done are out of reach of our resources. And that's what I have. Thank you.